ever get that feeling, like when you're looking at an incredible sunset and
Yeah.
you just know everyone else must be feeling that same sense of awe?
It's almost like we assume there's this universal beauty, something that transcends our individual perspectives.
Right. Or you hear a song, you're like, this is objectively like the most amazing music ever. But then you remember how much tastes can differ.
It really makes you question, doesn't it? If our experiences are so subjective, how can we be sure we're ever truly on the same page about anything?
Yeah, like, are we all just living in our own little worlds here? That's what's so fascinating about this deep dive. This article, The Bridge from Subjectivity to Objectivity, dives into this head-on with two philosophical heavyweights, Kant and Husserl.
Two of the greats. And what's really cool is how they offer these different but surprisingly complementary ways of looking at how we manage to agree on anything in a world full of individual minds.
Right, let's break it down. So first up, we've got Immanuel Kant.
Now, Kant was really interested in this idea of shared beauty. Like, how can we all look at something and agree that it's beautiful, even though beauty can feel so personal?
That's a great question. So, like, is there something more to it than just, I like what I like?
Exactly. And Kant believed there's a lot more going on beneath the surface. He argued that we're not just passively observing the world. Instead, our minds are actively shaping it.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How so?
He believed that we all have these built-in mental structures, these fundamental ways of processing information. Think of them like mental software that comes pre-installed.
So it's not just about the world as it is, but about how our brains are wired to understand it. That's kind of mind-blowing.
It is. It's like we're all experiencing reality through these lenses, these mental structures. And Kant believed that those structures are fundamentally the same for everyone.
Okay, so if our brains are all working from the same blueprint, does that automatically mean we'll agree on everything?
Not necessarily. We're still individuals, after all, with our own unique experiences. But that shared structure is what makes things like communication and understanding even possible in the first place.
So it's like a common ground, a starting point that lets us connect with each other.
You got it. And because of that shared framework, according to Kant, we can have conversations. We can agree on things like moral principles. We can even strive for objectivity in a world that can feel very subjective.
So even though our individual lives and experiences might be totally different, there's this underlying common ground in how our minds work.
Exactly. The article uses the example of sunsets, which I thought was perfect. Think about it. Even if your personal memories and feelings about sunsets are totally different from mine, the way our minds process the light, the colors, that vastness, it has these fundamental similarities. And that's what Kant was getting at. There's a shared structure there that allows for that kind of universal moment.
It's like, even though my sunset experience might be different from yours, our brains are experiencing the beauty in the same way.
You've got it. It's like finding a common language for something that feels so personal and unique.
Okay, that's Kant in a nutshell, right? Our brains are pre-wired for understanding. But I have a feeling this is just the tip of the iceberg. This is a deep dive after all.
You're right about that. Kant lays the groundwork. But then comes Edmund Husserl, who adds this whole other layer to the equation.
Okay, bring on Husserl. What did he have to say about all this?
Well, his big idea is something called ideal meanings. And it's not as complicated as it might sound. Husserl's big idea is this concept of ideal meanings. And it's not as complex as it sounds.
Ideal meanings. Okay, I'm listening.
Imagine for a second, you and I are both thinking about a triangle.
Okay, got it. Triangles, everyone's favorite shape.
Right. Now, you might be picturing a bright yellow triangle.
Like from a yield sign?
Exactly. And I might be picturing, I don't know, one of those perfectly drawn ones from a geometry textbook.
So totally different triangles, visually.
Totally. But underneath that, there's this shared understanding that we both have of what a triangle is. 3 sides, 3 angles.
Right, the concept itself.
Precisely. That deeper meaning that goes beyond our individual mental pictures, that's what Husserl's getting at.
So it's like there's this whole world of pure concepts, these ideal forms of things that exist outside of our own heads.
You're getting it. And here's the really interesting part. Husserl didn't think these ideal meanings were just random or arbitrary.
Because there's a reason we have them.
Exactly. He believed they're what allow us to communicate and build knowledge together. They're how we make sense of the world, not just as isolated individuals, but as a collective.
That's really interesting, because if we didn't have some way of tapping into those shared meanings, even if they're not perfectly identical for everyone,
It would be chaos.
total chaos. We couldn't even agree on what a triangle is, let alone have a conversation about philosophy.
Exactly. And the article makes this point about how It goes way beyond just basic shapes like triangles.
Okay, so how does it apply to more complex ideas?
Think about abstract concepts like justice or freedom or love even.
Right, those big, complex ideas.
We might have different personal interpretations, but there's still this shared underlying meaning that we're all engaging with.
It's like those ideal meanings are the common language, even when we don't realize we're speaking it.
Exactly. And finding that common ground, that's what makes conversation, debate, and even disagreement possible.
That makes sense. It's like, even if we disagree, at least we're disagreeing about the same thing.
You got it. And Husserl called this intersubjectivity.
Intersubjectivity, there's another good philosophy word. What does that one mean?
It's basically the idea that we don't experience the world in total isolation. Our minds are constantly interacting, influencing each other, refining our understanding of these shared meanings.
It's like this constant back and forth. Our individual experiences shape those shared meanings, and those shared meanings shape how we experience the world.
That's a great way to put it. It's this dynamic interplay between our own subjective experiences and this collective pool of meaning that we all tap into.
So both Kant, with his universal structures, and Husserl, with his ideal meanings, they're both trying to figure out how we bridge that gap between our own individual minds and a shared reality.
Exactly. They might approach it from different angles, but ultimately they're both grappling with that same fundamental question. How do we go from me to we?
So we've got Kant saying our brains are hardwired for understanding, and Husserl adding in this whole layer of shared meanings.
It's like Kant gives us the foundation, the basic framework, and then Husserl comes along and builds this whole structure on top of it, this interconnected web of meaning that we're all a part of.
I like that analogy. It makes it feel less like two separate theories and more like two pieces of the same puzzle.
Exactly. They both contribute to this bigger picture of how we bridge the gap from our own subjective experiences to a shared understanding of the world.
Which is a pretty amazing thing to think about. But let's bring it back down to earth for a second. Why does all of this matter? How does understanding Kant and Husserl actually apply to my life?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Yeah.
What's the practical takeaway from all this heady philosophy?
Exactly. It's all very interesting to think about, but does it actually change anything about how we live our lives?
I think it absolutely does. For one thing, understanding these concepts can make you a more effective communicator.
Oh, I can see that. If you can tap into those shared meanings, those underlying concepts that we're all working with, it's like you're speaking a more universal language.
Precisely. And that could be incredibly powerful, especially when you're dealing with people who have very different viewpoints from your own.
Instead of just talking past each other, you can start to find that common ground, that shared understanding that might be buried beneath the surface.
Exactly. And that's not just useful for resolving arguments. It's also about connecting with people on a deeper level, building empathy and understanding.
It's like even if you don't agree on everything, you can at least start from a place of mutual respect and understanding.
Absolutely. And that, I think, is more important than ever in today's world, where it feels like everyone is so quick to judge and dismiss anyone who sees things differently.
It's a good reminder that even in the midst of all our differences, there's still so much that connects us as human beings.
Exactly. And that connection, that shared understanding, that's what allows us to communicate, to learn from each other, to build a better world together.
I love that. This deep dive has definitely given me a lot to think about.
It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you. Until next time.
Thanks for listening.